Hey guys, Walls here with a chapter 2 discussion video for Of Mice and Men. Hope you guys are enjoying the book. Let's see what chapter 2 is all about. So we open up with a setting, or rather Steinbeck sets the scene. Remember, each chapter goes the same way. Steinbeck sets the scene, gives us a vivid description of where we are, introduces characters and dialogue, and then shows us a conflict. Now, this opening paragraph is about the bunkhouse. And notice how lived in this bunkhouse feels. It's not described like a place where people wouldn't actually stay. That's one thing that Steinbeck really brings to this novel is his insider knowledge of what these places would actually look like. Remember, he wrote Harvest Gypsies. He lived with these people. He knew what they went through. He knew their struggles. Notice the vivid language at the bottom there. I want you to think about how that last sentence makes something normal more dramatic. At about 10 o'clock in the morning, the sun threw a bright, dust laden bar through one of the side windows, and in and out of the beam, flies shot like rushing stars. I mean, you can picture that in your head. I mean, and maybe if the sun comes out at some point this weekend, you can kind of go look at through a window where there's a light ray coming in, a light beam, and you know how you just see little pieces of dust kind of just like floating around in them. That's what he's describing there, but he makes it sound like epic. You know what I mean? All right. Now we get to meet the other characters in this chapter. We meet Candy. He is referred to as the Swamper. Candy is the old man, and his job is to swamp out the bunkhouses, and basically he's like a custodian. He's missing a hand. He lost a hand while working on the ranch, but they keep him around to do the kind of the small work, and really the very important work of cleaning stuff out. But he's not held in high regard on the ranch. You've got Crooks, the stable buck. Crooks is the only black man on the ranch, and Candy tells a story at the beginning of chapter 2 about Crooks. I want you to pay very careful attention to the way that Candy describes Crooks as a person. He says he's a pretty nice fella, and he's got a lot of books. I think it's very interesting that Steinbeck would depict Crooks that way, given that Steinbeck is an author. We meet the boss, and we meet Curley. Now, our first impression of the boss is that he is very skeptical of George and Lennie. He doesn't quite trust him, but that doesn't necessarily mean he thinks they're up to no good. You got to remember, at this time, migrant workers were very common, and so the boss is seeing these men come and go quite frequently. So he's trying to figure out George and Lennie's deal, and look at the way that George kind of justifies his relationship with Lennie. I thought that was pretty funny. All right, we meet Curley. Curley's a little guy, but he's a boxer. He's handy. That's what they mean when they say that he's handy. He's a boxer. He's a fighter. He's very pugnacious and in your face. We also meet Curley's wife, and we meet Carlson and Slim. Now let's talk about a few of these characters in depth here. Now, this is a bit of conversation between George and Candy about Curley. So at the very top, you see Curley stared levelly at him. Well, next time you answer when you're spoke to, he turned toward the door and walked out. His elbows were still bent out a little. And then George says, "Say, what the hell's he got on his shoulder? Lennie didn't do nothing to him." And this is where Candy kind of tells us a little bit more about uh, Curley. And I like this question here. You've seen little guys like that, ain't you? Always scrappy. So he describes Curley as basically always being mad for being a little guy. And he hates big guys. So Curly sees Lennie as kind of a threat to his like physical dominance on the ranch. Curly has to be. He might not literally be the biggest guy on the ranch, but he's got to be the toughest. So as you read this, what you need to be thinking is like, what's going to happen? What conflicts do we think will come from this? What is being foreshadowed here? That the boss doesn't trust George and Lennie, and that Curly is kind of gunning for Lennie. Kind of, he might mess with Lennie a little bit. Okay. Now this is where we get a little bit of a clearer picture of who Candy is. I know Candy's talking about Curly's wife here, but here we kind of see Candy as like the ranch gossip. He knows a little bit about everyone, or excuse me, a lot about everyone at the ranch. Now, after reading this, I want to know, what are our initial impressions of Curly's wife? And as we continue to read this chapter, I want to know if you think that Curly's wife says or does anything that proves Candy right. What assertion is Candy making about Curly's wife here? Well, basically that she's got the eye. And that means that she's kind of not necessarily being unfaithful to Curly, but she's being flirtatious with the other men on the ranch. Now, he at the very end there he says, "Well, I think Curly's married a tart." And George, there's no reaction to that. George isn't like, "Oh no, what's going to happen?" He just says he ain't the first. There's plenty done that. So George isn't really impressed by all this, but we need to keep this in mind because it sets us up for a potential conflict later. Okay, now, uh, Curly's wife does come looking for Curly. Now, notice I'm talking about Curly, and I'm talking about Curly's wife. We don't know her name yet. So Curly's wife comes looking for Curly, and we do see her get a little flirtatious with George and Lennie. Now, Lennie says she's purty, and George says, yeah, and she's sure hiding it. Curly got his work ahead of him. Bet she'd clear out for 20 bucks. And all Lennie says back is, gosh, she was purty. And George goes off on him here. Now, ask yourself, is George justified? Does he have a reason for being so stern with Lennie? Think about what we learned about Lennie from chapter 1. What potential conflict could there be between Lennie and Curly's wife, even if it's not necessarily intentional? Okay. Now, this is where we get to meet Slim. Slim is basically the only universally respected man on the ranch. No one messes with Slim. And look at this description of him. The language here is so over the top that it's almost funny. And this is he talks about kind of his physical abilities here, like why he's so good on the ranch. And then we get this. There was a gravity in his manner and a quiet so profound that all talk stopped when he spoke. His authority was so great that his word was taken on any subject, be it politics or love. This was Slim, the jerkline Skinner. His hatchet face was ageless. He might have been 35 or 50. His ear heard more than was said to him, and his slow speech had overtones not of thought, but of understanding beyond thought. His hands, large and lean, were as delicate in their action as those of a temple dancer. So basically, I mean, look, I don't even, his Hatchet Face was, I don't even know what to make of that. Hatchet Face would be a cool band name, maybe. I don't know. But this right here, his ear heard more than was said to him, and his speech had overtones not of thought, but of understanding beyond thought. Basically, what Slim says goes because everyone understands that Slim is operating on like the next level. He is a very intelligent man, but he's also very good with people. Now, the first thing that Slim says here, though, I want you to think about this. This is an idea called juxtaposition, where you put two things together that are not necessarily alike. You can't understand heat if you don't understand cold. That's juxtaposition. Steinbeck's juxtaposition here is a beautiful literature sounding description of Slim, and then look at his first line of dialogue. It's brighter than a bitch outside, he says. So how does that compare to the description we get of Slim? I just thought that was pretty funny. All right. Now, this is a discussion that Slim and Carlson have. Now, Carlson, we don't get a whole lot about him right here, but the very first thing that Carlson asks about here is Slim's dog. And we see here that Slim's dog had 9 puppies, and he drowned 4 of them right off. She couldn't feed that many. Now, a question here I have for you is Slim's violence justified? You go further down, and we figure out why Carlson is so worried about Slim's puppies. He says, well, look here, Slim. I've been thinking that dog of Candy's is so damn old he can't hardly walk. Stinks like hell, too. Every time he comes into the bunkhouse, I can smell him for 2, 3 days. Why didn't you get Candy to shoot his old dog and give him one of the pups to raise up? I can smell that dog a mile away. Got no teeth, damn near blind, can't eat. Candy feeds him milk. He can't chew nothing else. Does Carlson make a good argument? What Carlson's going to do here is say that we need to get Candy to shoot his old dog, and maybe we can give him one of these new dogs. Now, the question I want you to ask yourself is this: how do these men evaluate whether or not a dog should live or die? Also, how do you think Lennie will react to hearing about Slim's pups? Remember, uh, George at the very beginning, chapter 1, says maybe one day we can get you a puppy. Puppies are bigger than mice. The thought here is that Lennie would be more likely to keep a puppy alive than a mouse. All right, but that's a big focus here. How do these men evaluate whether or not a dog should live or die? All right, now let's get on to this is where we're setting up the for chapter 3. Curley comes in for a little bit, scowls at George, and he's looking for his wife. And George says that he's worried that he's actually going to end up fighting with Curley. So here's the setup for chapter 3. Are we going to see George versus Curley? Are we going to see Curley versus Lennie? What's going to happen with Carlson and Candy's dog? Is anything going to happen? And I didn't add this, but is anything going to happen with Lennie and Curley's wife? These are all conflicts that have been set up in chapter 2, and in chapter 3, we'll see which one is set off. All right, guys, I hope you are enjoying the novel. When you come in on Monday, be prepared to write about chapters 1 and 2. Have a good one.